My parents spent my entire life reminding me that I should know my place. They said I was the mistake, the disappointment, the daughter who would never belong in their world. Years later, they stood in a crowded courtroom, waiting for someone important to walk through the doors. They had no idea that person was me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Marin Ellery, and for most of my life, I believed everything my parents said about me. We lived in a beautiful house in Massachusetts. From the outside, people thought we were the perfect family. My father, Gideon Ellery, was respected by everyone who knew him. My mother, Lenora, always smiled in public and spoke kindly to guests. My older brother, Stellan, was treated like he could do no wrong. Then there was me. I learned very young that I came last. If there was work to do around the house, it became my job. If guests visited, I was expected to stay quiet, help serve dinner, and clean up after everyone. No one asked how my day had been or what I wanted. They only noticed me when they needed something. At school, I worked as hard as I could. I studied late into the night because I hoped that bringing home good grades would finally make my parents proud. Every time I earned top marks or won an award, my father barely looked at the certificate before setting it aside. My mother would simply say that good grades were expected, not special. Then they would spend the rest of the evening praising Stellan, even when he had done nothing worth celebrating. I kept telling myself that if I tried a little harder, things would change. I helped with family events, followed every rule, and never talked back. I thought being patient would earn their love one day. Instead, it only made them expect more from me. The harder I worked, the less they seemed to notice. Family gatherings were always the worst. Relatives laughed with my parents and admired Stellan while I stayed in the background, making sure everyone had what they needed. I felt more like hired help than a daughter. No one questioned it because that was simply how things had always been. After one family dinner, as I quietly carried empty plates toward the kitchen, my father stopped me with a cold look. In front of everyone, he said, "Know your place, Marin. You'll never be one of us." Those words stayed with me long after the room fell silent, and I walked away wondering if I would ever truly belong anywhere. As I grew older, I stopped expecting kindness from my parents. Instead, I focused on doing whatever they asked because I believed it was my responsibility. Whenever a chance came to do something for myself, they found a reason why I should stay home instead. During my senior year of high school, one of my teachers encouraged me to apply for a scholarship at a respected university in another state. I secretly completed the application and was thrilled when I received an acceptance letter with financial support. Before I could celebrate, my parents told me the family needed me close to home. They said leaving would be selfish and that a good daughter always put her family first. I turned down the scholarship without telling anyone how much it hurt. The same pattern continued as the years passed. I missed trips with friends because my parents expected me to help with family business or take care of things around the house. Slowly, my friends stopped inviting me because they already knew my answer would always be no. My world became smaller, and I accepted it because I thought that was how life was supposed to be. Stellan never worried about consequences. He spent money carelessly, borrowed from people without paying them back, and made one poor business decision after another. Every time something went wrong, my parents expected me to fix it. Sometimes I used my savings to cover his debts. Other times I spent days organizing paperwork, meeting with angry customers, or solving problems that were never mine to begin with. No one thanked me afterward. They simply acted as if it was my duty. Whenever I looked tired or questioned why everything always fell on me, my mother had the same answer. She would gently place her hand on my shoulder and remind me that I owed the family everything because they had given me a home and raised me. She made me feel guilty for even thinking about my own future. After hearing those words for so many years, I began believing them. The only person who ever made me feel truly valued was my grandmother. She always encouraged me to think for myself and reminded me that kindness should never mean giving up my own life. After she passed away, I felt completely alone. I had no idea she had tried to protect me in ways I could not yet see. Not long after her funeral, my parents became strangely secretive whenever her name came up. They quickly changed the subject whenever I asked simple questions about her belongings or the promises she had once made to me. I did not realize it then, but they were hiding something important. I continued trusting them, never imagining that the biggest betrayal of my life was already waiting just ahead. A few days after my grandmother's funeral, the family gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of her will. I almost did not go because I already knew how these family meetings usually ended for me. Still, I wanted to be there to honor the woman who had always believed in me. I sat quietly near the back of the room while relatives filled the seats around me. No one spoke to me except for a polite greeting from the lawyer. Before the meeting could even begin, my father looked across the room and shook his head in disappointment. He said he could not believe I had come, knowing how difficult this day was for everyone else. Then he accused me of only caring about money and said I should be ashamed of myself for showing up. His words caught me completely by surprise. I had never asked my grandmother for anything. I was there because I missed her. Before I could answer, Stellan laughed loudly and told everyone that I was acting like I belonged in the family. He joked that I should remember I had always been the family's servant, not an equal. A few relatives looked uncomfortable, but no one defended me. Some simply looked away while others stayed silent. That silence hurt almost as much as the insults. I felt every eye in the room on me, and I wished I could disappear. The lawyer tried to continue the meeting, but I could no longer focus on anything being said. My chest felt heavy, and I struggled to hold back my tears. I slowly stood up, apologized for interrupting, and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. No one called my name. As I stepped outside, I realized I had spent years hoping my family would one day treat me differently. At that moment, I accepted that nothing would ever change. I drove home with tears running down my face. I believed I had finally lost the only person who truly cared about me, and now even her final goodbye had ended with another humiliation. That evening I sat alone in my small apartment, staring out the window and wondering what my future would look like. For the first time, I seriously thought about leaving everything behind and starting over somewhere no one knew my name. Just as the sun disappeared, my phone rang. I almost ignored it because I did not have the energy to speak with anyone. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. A calm older man's voice introduced himself and asked if I was Marin Ellery. After I quietly said yes, he told me his name was Blaine Mercer and that he had been my grandmother's attorney for many years. He said there was something very important we needed to discuss, and it could not wait another day. At that moment, I had no idea that one phone call was about to change my entire life forever. The next morning, I met Blaine Mercer at his small law office. He welcomed me kindly and asked me to sit down. His voice was calm, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was speaking to me with respect. He placed a large folder on the desk and said my grandmother had trusted him with something she wanted me to receive only under certain conditions. She believed the time had finally come for me to know the truth. Blaine explained that my grandmother had created a private legal trust years before she passed away. She had done it quietly because she was afraid my parents would try to interfere if they found out. The trust included financial security, but Blaine said that was only a small part of what my grandmother wanted to leave behind. More important than the money were the letters, records, and legal documents she had carefully collected over many years. He handed me the first letter written in my grandmother's own handwriting. As I read it, tears filled my eyes. She wrote that she had watched me grow into a kind and honest young woman. She also admitted that she had seen the way my parents treated me for years. She wanted me to know that I had never deserved their harsh words or unfair treatment. She apologized for not being able to protect me more while she was alive. Blaine then opened another folder filled with copies of letters, school papers, and business records. He showed me proof that several opportunities had been taken away from me without my knowledge. There were letters from universities, internship programs, and professional organizations that had never reached me. Some had been answered with fake replies saying I was not interested. Others had been hidden completely. My parents had made sure I never even knew those chances existed. Blaine explained that my grandmother had quietly investigated after noticing too many strange things happening whenever I earned recognition. She discovered that Gideon and Lenora believed I might become more successful than Stellan. Instead of encouraging both of their children, they chose to hold me back so their son would always remain the center of attention. Hearing those words broke something inside me, but at the same time, they lifted a weight I had carried for years. I finally understood that my failures were not always my own. Many doors had been closed before I ever had the chance to open them. My grandmother's final letter ended with a simple message. She told me to stop blaming myself for the choices other people had made. She wanted me to build a life based on my own dreams instead of living under someone else's control. As I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope, I realized my entire life had been built on lies. For the first time, I also realized that my future no longer belonged to my parents. It finally belonged to me. After leaving Blaine's office, I spent several days thinking about what I wanted to do next. For years, my life had been controlled by other people. Now I finally had the chance to make my own decisions. I could have stayed and argued with my parents or tried to expose everything they had done, but I knew that would only keep me tied to the past. I wanted something better. I packed my belongings, left my hometown, and moved to another state where no one knew me or my family. It was not easy starting over, but for the first time, every choice belonged to me. I used the inheritance carefully and never wasted it. Instead of buying expensive things, I invested in my education. I enrolled in college and studied harder than ever before. Every class reminded me that I had always been capable. The opportunities one had been denied were finally in front of me, and I refused to waste them. After earning my degree, I continued to law school. The work was difficult, and there were many nights when I barely slept because I was preparing for exams or reading case files. Even when I felt exhausted, I remembered my grandmother's words and kept moving forward. Years passed, and I slowly built a career based on honesty, discipline, and respect for the law. Every position I accepted taught me something valuable. I never looked for shortcuts or special treatment. I earned every promotion through hard work. Eventually, after many years of dedication, I was appointed as a federal judge. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. I wished my grandmother had been there to see it, because she was the first person who believed I could become more than others expected. I never contacted my parents during those years. I changed my address, focused on my work, and lived a quiet life. As far as they knew, I had disappeared after leaving town. They believed I had failed because they could not imagine me succeeding without them. I never felt the need to correct their assumption. While I was building my future, my family's life was moving in the opposite direction. Gideon continued trusting Stellan with important business decisions, even though he had never learned from his mistakes. One risky investment followed another. Loans became larger, profits became smaller, and people slowly lost confidence in the family business. Financial problems that had once been hidden became impossible to ignore. Lawsuits started appearing, and longtime business partners walked away. I occasionally heard small pieces of news through public records, but I stayed focused on my own life. I had worked too hard to let the past control me again. My parents never once imagined that the daughter they had dismissed for so many years was now serving in one of the highest positions in the federal court system. They still believed I had no place in their world. Soon they would discover that life had changed in ways none of them could have imagined. Several years passed without a single message from my parents. I accepted that chapter of my life was over and gave all my attention to my work. Then one evening, my phone rang while I was finishing paperwork at home. I almost ignored the call because I did not recognize the number. When I answered, I immediately recognized my father's voice. He sounded older and far less confident than I remembered. He asked how I had been and spoke as if nothing had ever happened between us. It felt strange hearing him act so friendly after everything that had happened. I listened quietly while he explained that the family had been facing difficult times. Business losses had become impossible to recover from. Creditors were demanding payment, and several lawsuits had been filed against the company. He said Stellan had become involved in a serious legal case that could change his life forever. Before ending the call, he asked if we could meet because the family needed my help. A few days later, I agreed to meet them at a small restaurant. When I arrived, both of my parents were already waiting. My mother stood up with tears in her eyes and hugged me before I could react. She said she missed me and wished we had never grown apart. Her words sounded kind, but something about them did not feel sincere. The conversation quickly turned toward money. My father spoke about unpaid debts, while my mother hinted that family members should support one another during hard times. They never asked about my life or what I had accomplished over the years. They only talked about their own problems and what they hoped I could do for them. I realized they had not changed at all. They simply believed I had somehow found enough money to rescue them. I remained calm and respectful. I did not argue or remind them of the past. I also chose not to tell them anything about my career. The less they knew, the better. Near the end of the meeting, my father mentioned that Stellan's case would soon be heard in federal court. He said the judge assigned to the case would have enormous influence over the outcome. Then he looked at me and asked if I could attend the hearing to show that the family was united during such a difficult time. I looked at both of them for a moment before quietly agreeing. They seemed relieved, believing I had finally decided to stand beside them again. As we left the restaurant, my mother smiled with confidence, certain that everything would soon work out in their favor. Neither of them had any idea why I had accepted the invitation. They believed they were bringing back the daughter they once ignored. In reality, they were walking toward a moment that would force them to face the truth they had spent years refusing to see. The morning of the hearing arrived, and the courthouse was already busy when my family arrived. Lawyers walked through the hall carrying large files, reporters waited outside the courtroom, and people quietly filled the seats inside. The case against Stellan had received a great deal of attention because of the financial losses involved. My parents entered with serious expressions, but I could still see confidence in my father's face. He greeted a few people he recognized and acted as though his family name still carried the same influence it once had. I watched everything from a private area, preparing for the hearing just as I had done many times before. No one in my family knew I was there. A court officer announced that the hearing was about to begin and asked everyone to take their seats. The room became completely silent. A moment later, the officer called for everyone to rise as the judge entered the courtroom. I walked through the side door wearing my black judicial robe and took my place behind the bench. As I looked across the courtroom, my eyes met my father's. The color disappeared from his face. My mother stared at me without moving, and Stellan looked completely shocked. None of them could believe what they were seeing. For a few long seconds, the entire room remained silent. Then the hearing officially began. The attorneys introduced themselves, and the court followed its normal procedures. When it was time for the defense to speak, Stellan's lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor." Hearing those words was one thing, but watching my own family realize they had to use the same words was something I never expected to experience. My father lowered his head slightly before speaking. For the first time in my life, he addressed me with respect because the courtroom required it. He could no longer order me around or speak down to me. Inside those walls, I was not the daughter he had ignored for years. I was the judge responsible for making sure the law was followed fairly. My mother looked as though she wanted to say something personal, but she knew she could not. The courtroom was not a place for family arguments or emotional speeches. It was a place where facts mattered more than reputation. Throughout the hearing, I remained calm and professional. I treated both sides equally and never allowed my personal history to affect my responsibilities. I asked clear questions, listened carefully to every answer, and followed the law exactly as I had sworn to do. My family finally understood that my position had been earned through years of hard work, not through luck or anyone's help. As the hearing continued, I remembered the words my father had spoken years ago after that family gathering. He had told me to know my place because I would never be one of them. Sitting on the bench that day, I finally understood something he never had. I had found my place long ago. It was simply far higher than he had ever believed possible. As the case moved forward, every decision had to be based on facts, not feelings. I reminded myself of the promise I had made when I accepted my position. My duty was to protect the law and treat every person equally, no matter who they were. My family was now standing in front of me, but they would receive the same fair process as anyone else. The lawyers presented financial records, business contracts, bank statements, and witness testimony. Everything was carefully examined before becoming part of the official record. Day after day, the evidence became clearer. The documents showed that Stellan had approved false financial reports and signed papers that misled investors. Several witnesses confirmed that he had ignored repeated warnings from employees and advisors. The mistakes were not accidents. They were choices that caused serious harm to many innocent people. My name was never connected to any of those actions because I had left years before those events took place. There was no question about my involvement. I had nothing to do with the business or the decisions that had led to the case. During one hearing, my father asked for permission to speak directly to the court. He began talking about our family, saying they had already suffered enough and deserved another chance. He spoke about difficult times and asked for mercy instead of focusing on the legal issues before the court. I listened patiently until he finished. Then I calmly explained that personal stories could not replace evidence and that every decision would be made according to the law. The courtroom became silent as everyone understood that the case would not be influenced by emotion or family connections. My mother looked disappointed, but she said nothing. She finally realized that I could not be controlled the way I had been years ago. I felt no satisfaction in seeing them struggle. I also felt no anger. Carrying hate for so many years would have only hurt me. Letting go of that pain had allowed me to build a better life, and I was not willing to lose that peace now. I simply continued doing my job with honesty and respect. The people inside the courtroom watched everything carefully. They knew my relationship with the defendants had become public, yet they also saw that I never showed favoritism or revenge. I followed the same rules I would have followed in any other case. Even the attorneys recognized that the hearing had remained fair from beginning to end. By the time the evidence had been fully presented, many people in the courtroom had reached the same conclusion. The daughter who had been ignored, criticized, and pushed aside for most of her life had grown into the most honorable person in the family. My parents had spent years believing they had chosen the stronger child. In the end, character mattered far more than pride, money, or reputation. That truth was now impossible for anyone to deny. After the trial ended, I returned to my normal work and expected life to become quiet again. I had no interest in talking about my family or explaining the past to anyone. I believed the case was over, and I wanted to move forward. A few weeks later, Blaine Mercer contacted me and told me he was ready to carry out the final part of my grandmother's instructions. She had left behind several sealed letters that were meant to be shared with certain members of our extended family only after everything else had been settled. Blaine carefully followed her wishes and delivered copies of the letters along with the documents she had collected over many years. The letters described everything my grandmother had witnessed while she was alive. She wrote about the unfair way my parents had treated me from childhood into adulthood. She explained how they had ignored my achievements, taken away important opportunities, and made me believe I was worth less than my brother. She also described how they had hidden information about the inheritance she wanted me to receive. Every statement was supported by records, letters, and official documents that she had saved. No one could dismiss her words as guesses or opinions because the evidence spoke for itself. As relatives finished reading everything, many of them were shocked. Some admitted they had believed the stories my parents had told for years. They thought I had chosen to leave the family because I was selfish or ungrateful. They never realized I had been carrying the weight of years of unfair treatment in silence. One by one, a few relatives reached out to me. Some called, while others wrote letters. They apologized for believing things that were not true and for never asking me what had really happened. I accepted their apologies without anger because I knew they had only seen one side of the story. My parents could no longer deny the truth. Too many people had seen the letters and the documents. Their excuses slowly disappeared because every question had a clear answer supported by proof. The respect they had once enjoyed within the family faded away. It was not because I tried to embarrass them or damage their reputation. I never spoke against them in public or asked anyone to turn away from them. The truth had done all the work on its own. I often thought about my grandmother during those days. Even after her passing, she had found a way to protect me and restore my name. She knew that real justice was not built on revenge but on honesty. Looking back, I realized she had given me something far more valuable than an inheritance. She had given me the chance to finally live without carrying the blame for things that had never been my fault. For the first time in my life, the people around me knew who I truly was, and I no longer had to prove my worth to anyone. Writing. Months passed after everything settled, and life slowly became quiet in a way I had never experienced before. One morning, I drove to the cemetery to visit my grandmother's grave. The weather was calm, and the sky looked clear, almost like the world was giving me a moment of peace. I stood in front of her headstone for a long time without speaking. There were so many things I wished I could tell her, but instead I simply stayed there and let the silence speak for me. I thought about everything that had happened since the day I left home. The pain, the confusion, the hard work, and the long years of rebuilding myself all came back to me at once. But this time, it did not feel heavy. It felt like a story that had finally reached its ending. I realized that for most of my life I had been trying to find my place in a world that never truly saw me. I had believed I was meant to stay in the background, to accept whatever others decided for me. But standing there, I understood something different. My place was never meant to be under anyone's shadow. It had always been where honesty, effort, and quiet strength naturally led me. I did not need to fight for it anymore. It was something I had already earned by living through everything and still choosing to move forward. My parents were no longer part of my daily life. I knew they were dealing with the results of their own decisions, but I no longer carried anger about it. That chapter belonged to them, not me. I had let go of the need to understand or change what they believed. My focus was now on my work and the responsibilities I carried every day. I continued to serve in the courtroom, making decisions carefully and fairly, always remembering the importance of treating people with respect. Every case reminded me how important truth and fairness were, and I never took that responsibility lightly. I did not feel the need to prove myself anymore. That pressure had slowly disappeared over time, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from experience and growth. Before leaving the cemetery, I placed my hand gently on the headstone and thanked my grandmother for everything she had done for me, even when I did not understand it at the time. As I turned to leave, I remembered the words that had once followed me throughout my life. Know your place. For a moment, I smiled softly because I finally understood what those words meant. I looked back one last time and whispered, I finally do. Then I walked away, not carrying the past anymore, but carrying peace instead. The greatest change was not in how others saw me, but in how I finally saw myself, and nothing could take that away,